There are seats right there. And then we have Caroline, the wonderful doggie. You can be closer to her too. She's my new meta object.
Look at that.
It's so beautiful. We're going to get back to you, believe me. So I want us to do sitting, which I'll guide using the breath, because that's always there as something that we can return to. Loving kindness practice as a form, as a method, tends to be more active. It's verbal. Even though we're silent, we're repeating phrases and bringing people to mind. And so sometimes people really have a feeling they just want a break and they want some rest. And it's perfectly fine just to come back and be with the breath. It's not, secondary or second best or anything like that. So I just want to reinforce that skill. Then I'm going to talk a little bit more about loving kindness. We're going to do some loving kindness walking meditation, and come back and do a sitting. But because I promised you I would tell you 2 stories before we do that, when I was doing the reflection on call to mind all the beings who are somehow involved in your being here in this room right now. I love that reflection. I mean, it means a lot to me. I think it brings one pretty easily into that state of a deeper sense of what connection or metta is, which is so different than approving of everybody or liking everybody, but it is that kind of knowing that our lives are connected. So I do tend to do it everywhere. And I did that reflection once. It was 2011. There were a number of activities in downtown New York City leading up to the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and Trinity Church, which is way downtown near the side of the World Trade Center, was doing a number of them, and I did an evening of loving kindness for them. So it was like September 8th or something like that. And Trinity Church also has this place, which is like a drop-in center. It's called Charlotte's Place. Somebody named Charlotte endowed the space for anybody to come in during the day and use, and have a place to be and use a computer and a bathroom, things like that. So it's a beautiful, beautiful place and room, and it's got these big plate glass windows onto the street. So that's where I was doing the evening. So I did the reflection, because I always like to do the reflection. And at the end, this woman came up to me and she said, to tell you the truth, I was just walking down the street. And I looked inside and I thought, I'm going to go in there. And I thought, that's a little ding in my theory of reality. And then just later that week, I was in Philadelphia and I was doing an evening. It was a benefit for a preschool. And the preschool it takes place in this church and in the basement, and we were using the church as the facility for the benefit. And I guess there are a lot of different school activities that happen in the church, because I did the reflection, as I always like to do. And this woman came up to me afterwards and she said, I'm here because I thought tonight was the PTA meeting. And it was the wrong night. So I thought, that's the second little ding in my theory of reality, which I was, therefore, obviously there are causes and conditions anyway, but that's why I was careful to say, I feel safe in this facility, saying, I bet no one was just driving down the road and had the thought that they'd come in here. So whether it's, kind of clear causes and conditions, there's some causes and conditions at work. In every event, in every moment. So now I've done that, so as I promised. Okay, so we're going to sit. And going back to tranquil and alert, which is actually the key to the technical side of meditation practice, you could say. We're always thinking about balance in the development or the growth of meditation. So they say there's a certain kind of balance, tranquil and alert, that is represented right away in our posture. We want some alertness, some energy in our bodies, right? So you want to have your back straight. But you don't want like so much energy that you're all uptight. You want to be relaxed and at ease, tranquil, but not so tranquil that you're like way slumped over, like you couldn't care less, and you're sort of setting the stage to fall asleep. I mean, you might fall asleep anyway, but we don't need to make it nearly inevitable, so we feel our way into that balance between relaxing and also being alert. And we feel that in our posture. And you can close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. If your eyes are open, they could be a little bit open. And if you feel very sleepy and your eyes are closed, it's fine to just open them up and continue on with your practice. So once again, before we bring our attention to the breath, you can just sit and listen to sound, pleasant sounds, unpleasant sounds, whatever it might be. It's like you let the sounds wash through you. You don't have to resist them, you don't have to follow after them. Just let them come, let them go. Bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. Bring your attention to your hands. And see if you can make the shift from the more conceptual level, like go fingers, to the world of direct sensation. Pulsing, throbbing, pressure. You don't have to name these things, but feel them. This is where we rest our attention, in the world of changing sensations. And bring your attention to the feeling of your breath, the actual sensations of your breath. This is just the normal, natural breath in this system. You don't have to try to make the breath deeper or different. And see if there's a place where the breath is more distinct or stronger for you. Maybe it's at the nostrils, or the chest or the abdomen. If you find that place, you can bring your attention there and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. If you're at the nostrils, it may be tingling, vibration, warmth, coolness. If at the chest or the abdomen, it may be movement, pressure, stretching, release. Again, you don't want to be naming those things, but feel them. Images or sounds or sensations or emotions should arise. If they're not really strong enough to pull you away from the breath, you can just let them flow on by. You're breathing. Just aim your attention toward one breath. Everything else can come and go, doesn't matter. If something arises that's strong enough to pull you away, you get lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, don't worry about it. You can realize that you've been gone. See if you can gently let go of whatever has taken you away and return your attention to the feeling of the breath. So if you have to let go and begin again 7 billion times in the next couple of minutes, that's okay. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. So that, in many ways, is like our foundational practice that is, as I said last night, something we can take with us anywhere and something we can keep returning to. So I'm wondering if you have any questions just about that technique or anything you experienced in using that method, or comments. Yes?
So I just wanted to let everyone know before we start with comments that this is being recorded for YouTube, so no one will be able to see you, but the audio may get recorded.
Hello. And if you would prefer that your question not be on record in some way, I'm sure Tucker, you can just go up to Tucker and ask him to cut that part out. Yes?
I was wondering, I keep hearing about kind of ignoring discomfort and just staying in position. Is it okay to shift if I my back hurts?
Okay, so the question was about how she keeps hearing about ignoring discomfort and just stay in a position. Is it okay to shift if your back hurts? I'll say yes. There's often a balance there too. And there are lots of different possible responses to your question. Partly because balance is not a stagnant thing. It doesn't always look the same for any one of us, and it certainly doesn't always look the same between us. The idea in meditation, in mindfulness meditation, is beginning with the breath and then working with looking at sensations in our bodies, emotions, things that come up for us, to have a balanced enough relationship to them so that we're creating the platform for insight or learning to happen. There's a lot to be learned with pain, for example. It's something that I saw in my own practice. I began with a teacher who told us not to move for an hour, and there were no chairs, however uncomfortable they may seem. Believe me, if you had none, it would be worse. And this was in India, there were no zafus, there were no nice cushions. We were rolling up our sleeping bags, sitting on the floor, and it hurt so much. And I always moved. I moved every single sitting. And then, just as a side note, that was one of the really important places where I learned the value of beginning again. Because I would move very early on in the sitting, and sometimes could spend 40 minutes judging myself for having moved. Why did you move? You're always the first one to move. You're always the only one to move. Look at that person. They never move. Well, who knows about them? But you're always moving. Which, took the irony was that the disruption to my concentration from the physical movement lasted like 30 seconds, whereas the disruption to my concentration from buying into all that judgment could last 30 minutes. And I finally realized, okay, you moved, it's done, this is a new sitting. Just start over. And I always come back to that. It's almost like the core teaching of all. We can begin again. We can start over. We need to start over. This is how progress happens. It's not linear. It's not like one direction. We're always falling down and having to start over. That's the nature of things. So that's a side note. So the reason I was moving so early on in the sitting was because I wasn't moving because I was in severe pain. I was moving because when the first little inkling of discomfort would arise, I would start thinking, what's it going to feel like in 5 minutes? What's it going to feel like in 10 minutes? What's it going to feel like in 20 minutes? It's going to be absolutely unbearable. And this, needless to say, was not just a mental habit that was happening because I was sitting in a funny posture on the floor in India. This was a strong mental habit of mine. Something, didn't have to be physical pain, could be emotional pain. Something painful would be happening, and right away I would take it and run. This is going to be a whole lot worse in a day. This is going to be how it is for the rest of your life, right? And so that habit was of taking what was already somewhat difficult in the moment and adding to it all of that anticipated difficulty and trying to bear it all at once. So of course I would feel overcome, I would feel defeated, and I'd give up. So that was the important part of the learning. Whether you move or not doesn't matter in the end. I mean, really, it doesn't matter. This is quite arbitrary. But that learning was really important for me. So sometimes we set the stage so that we're incorporating physical discomfort along with everything else. Not to the point where you're hurting yourself, long before then. You know, we're exacerbating an injury or something like that. But sometimes it's kind of interesting to look at the things we so much don't want to look at and realize, wow, I can understand this in a whole other way just by the fact of having looked at it. But it absolutely needs to be balanced. If you're sitting there fretting, you hate it, you're tired, and it's going to happen, honestly, I think it's much better to move. You know, just move, start over. Or in loving kindness meditation, the instruction would be to move, because it's not a meditation where we're particularly trying to understand the nature of the painful feeling. It's where we're trying to cultivate loving kindness. So you might spend a little time, because it would be interesting, having loving kindness for your knee or your back or something like that, for the painful feeling, but then you go on. And if that means moving, that's perfectly the right thing to do. You know, other schools emphasize posture more than the school I was trained in, which was largely, all my original teachers were either Burmese or had practiced in Burma, which I sometimes call the Schlumpy School of Meditation. It's like, even the Buddha images are like a little slouched, you know, it's like in contrast to the beautiful Zen tradition, which is so extraordinary. So, except for the one teacher who really emphasized not moving, most of my teachers were not that. That sort of wasn't the most important thing at all, you know, and it would really be very personal. It would depend. I once, the other thing I was going to say was like along the tranquility to alertness spectrum, there are different styles. Teachers have different personalities, where often I felt that a particular school, a particular teacher might emphasize a certain strength, but in the end it has to be balanced with all the others. You know, so like my early teachers who had us not move were really emphasizing resoluteness and like power and energy and things like that. That didn't mean they never got to gentleness, you know, and relaxation. They did, but they would set a foundation with the other stuff first, you know. And I remember years after we started the retreat center in Barrie, the Insight Meditation Society, we invited a very, very, very renowned, wonderful meditation master from somewhere else in Burma. And we were sitting up in one of the rooms, which is kind of like a lounge room, having a dialogue with him before he was going to go into the meditation hall. And there was just a small group of people, and one of the people just sitting on the floor, one of the meditators said, you know, I'm having a lot of trouble with physical pain, and I don't know what to do. And this great, renowned meditation master pointed to one of the like plush, upholstered armchairs. And he said, the moment you start feeling that pain, you should go sit in a chair like that. And I thought, where were you when I was in India? You know, sweating and like crying. And he went on to say that from his point of view, the quality he was trying to engender in people most strongly was tranquility. And he didn't want to do anything that would mar that deepening of tranquility. And once you had established some of that, then he would challenge you, you know, in some ways toward a different edge, but not until then. And so everything was about relax, just be at ease, sit on that chair. Not that we had those chairs in India, but, you know, and I just thought that was kind of fascinating, that in the end, we need balance, and we might come to that just in different ways, at different times. So that's why I said, okay, move, but don't move constantly. Because then we're just restless, and we're going to be breaking up the possibility of stillness too much, But if you feel like you're being distracted and it's like too much, you don't have the juice, or that may not be the particular style of meditation you're even doing right then, where you're going to investigate the pain, just move. Okay, yeah.
You talk about stillness. One of my biggest issues is noise, sounds. I'm to the point where I want to get those earphones and knock out everything, Is that something that is part of developmental in practice?
You mean you feel too sensitive to the sound?
Oh yeah, it just distracts me. I always, you talk about that a million times starting over. It just seems like it's a constant.
Okay, so the question was about feeling distracted and I assume annoyed by sound and wanting to get like those big ear things, to block out the sound. And is that just part of the natural process of ongoing process of a practice? I think it is part of a natural process, and it is something we work through in a way. Almost like hearing the sound is best heard in a really big space, just like a big energy moving through the body best happens in a really big space. If we kind of glom onto it, it really becomes an irritant. And so a lot of the ability to just be okay with the experience of hearing has to do with creating a big enough space in the mind so that the sound is kind of passing through. I understand the temptation to get those really big ear things, and in some ways, at some levels, I think it's actually okay. But given my own particular tendency to really try to emphasize meditation in daily life, I always think, well, what about that moment when you're at work and something's going on that's really kind of annoying and you can't really open your desk drawer and like put on your big earphones? So what about then? Can't we find a way of being with our experience that's going to be independent of props and needing these elaborate things, and that really can be with us anywhere we go, whatever we're facing, because that ultimately is the point. So a lot of things we do, we're sitting here, we're not sitting downtown Tucson. We don't have our cell phones on, we're not blaring the radio. We're trying to help create and foster an atmosphere of some stillness, but do we absolutely need it? Then we're in trouble. Because it will just be limited. And there's some ways in which some people kind of get into this thing of meditation that's kind of fear-based. Like, what if there's a sound? It's going to disrupt my meditation. I don't know about here, I experienced that a lot in people in New York. Where people say it was fine for the Buddha sitting under a tree 2,600 years ago. It's too bad I live in Manhattan, where it's so noisy. I couldn't possibly meditate because it's so noisy. So in the end, we want to try to deal with it. And that means also taking a look probably at the annoyance or what's happening in your body, is it tightening up, the resistance, and the kind of sensitivity to it, and being able to release some of that. I say that as someone who's practiced not all of my really intensive practice, but a good chunk of it in Asia, which is so noisy. And that was a big surprise to me. Whether it's construction or loudspeakers blaring, I don't even want to say what kind of music, because then you'll be hearing it in your head the rest of the day. Familiar music, but in Burmese, so you catch the tune and you think, what is that song? Or so much construction, and in Burma, when I went there in 1985 to do intensive loving kindness practice, I was doing walking meditation like in the corridor, outside corridor, like veranda, and they were doing construction right, like, closer than the gazebo. So it was all like drills and things like that. And there was a friend that I'd gone to Burma with who was in the room next to mine. And all of a sudden, like, her door flings open. And she comes running out, and she's got this big can of, like, powdered milk in her hand, really big can. And she takes her arm, like, ready to hurl it at the guys doing the construction. And I just reached up and took her arm and said, "Don't do that." We were silent, right? So I could hardly speak. I said, "Don't do that. You're going to regret that." There I was doing all that loving kindness. So that's not to say it's easy, because I know it's not easy, but it's also important that we be able to kind of expand that sense of what we're including in the field of mindfulness, because that is also the prelude to including more and more beings in the field of loving kindness.
Can you speak about whether we should have a goal when we do our meditation practice, or should we just let it be?
Should we have a goal when we do our meditation practice, or should we just let it be? Well, of course, I have a kind of tendency more toward let it be. I think a goal is fine, but it needs to be a realistic goal. And that usually means some confrontation with the ideas we may be holding. So, for example, when I first went to India to learn meditation, I went all the way to India, I had this deep desire to learn meditation, but I'd never done it before, not even for one moment. And I think, I said this last night, I was very much not wanting like a sort of a dogmatic scene where I had to, call myself a Buddhist or reject anything else. So I had a very particular kind of scene I wanted, which was very practical, down to earth kind of thing. So it took a while to find that. And then when I finally found that, it was in the form of an intensive 10-day retreat. That's how I began my meditation practice, never having sat for one single second before. When I got there, I went into that compound, never having meditated. And the very first instruction I got was what we just did. Sit down and feel your breath. At first I thought, feel my breath? That's so stupid. I came all the way to India. Where's the magical, esoteric, fantastic technique that's going to wipe out all my suffering? Feel my breath. I could have said in Buffalo to feel my breath. And then I thought, well, how hard can this be? Like, I thought, okay, what's it going to be? 700 breaths, 800 breaths before my mind wanders. And to my absolute shock, it was like 2. Sometimes 1, sometimes a half, sometimes 4 in a really good run. And then my mind would just, start wandering, as minds do. So that's an unrealistic expectation. Like, okay, today I can only be with 4 breaths, tomorrow I'll be with 18 before my mind starts to wander. Next week I'll be with 48. And if that's the kind of goal we have, it's not being fair to ourselves, because that's not what progress actually looks like. So my teacher said over and over and over again, basically, what I had said earlier, the most important moment in the whole process is the time when you've already blown it. Your mind has already wandered, you've already gone far away, you've already gotten distracted, then what do you do? Can you let go more gently, more easily? Can you start over again with a better feeling, like a full heart, instead of being so down on yourself? That's the training. Now that is awfully hard to believe, and I certainly didn't believe it for a very long time, even though I heard it over and over and over again, but that's how the process actually happens. You know, so I think it's great to have a goal as long as it's based on understanding of how the process actually works. So that usually means dialogue, you know, and questioning and reading and trying to figure it out, you know, usually collectively with a community of some kind or teacher, you know, just to sort of set your course in a good direction, because the tendency to judge ourselves is so strong. And, you know, then we just pick up this idea about what should be happening and we use that to judge ourselves, and that's just unfortunate. Yeah.
I had a question. You said to focus on one breath, and at the end of a breath, for me there's a stillness and a quiet moment, and I really like that.
Yeah.
But then if I'm focused on that, then the next breath, I'm reaching for, and so I'm not in a rhythm then breathing. Is that good or bad, or does it matter? Or?
The question was about a pause or a stillness after, is it after an out breath or after an out breath? And liking to focus on that stillness. And then what happens when the next breath begins? You just kind of pick it up?
There's a little urgency.
Okay. Okay, so then there's a little feeling of urgency around the next breath. Often there is a pause or a gap. For some people, there's some disquietude about that, and they prefer to kind of put in a physical anchor there. You know, usually it's a touch point, like depending on where you're watching the breath, maybe like your fingers are touching, somewhere your body's actually in contact, and they move from the breath to that physical point and then back to the breath. If it's working to stay more with the awareness itself, you know, or that sense of stillness, that's great. You know, that's perfectly fine. It could be that there's like a little too much effort, which is why there's that sense of urgency. And so sometimes there's something people say to themselves that just kind of reminds them to relax a little bit, because it sounds wonderful, you know, other than that slight grasping, which I'm sure is very slight. You know, I used to say, I had a different thing going on, but one of the things that I found so funny, after being so dismissive of the technique, was that it was awfully hard to just be with one breath. And one of the reasons I saw in looking at my experience that it was so difficult for me was that almost as soon as this breath would begin, I was kind of mentally leaning forward to get ready for the next 50. And that too, I came to understand, was not just a mental posture that was happening because I was in formal meditation. That was very much my mental posture. I was very frightened. I was very wary. I was very guarded. I didn't know what might happen next. A lot had already happened to me in my life, and I didn't know what was coming next. And so I was kind of mentally leaning forward. And so what I used to say to myself was, settle back. I'd say, let the breath come to you. Or I'd say, you're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it. Because I had so much performance anxiety, it's like I'd never done it before. So for me, in those days, balance all was about settle back. Just let the breath come to you. And of course, we can be way too far back. And in effect, we need to come forward more and be more connected, more engaged, you know. But that wouldn't produce that feeling of, you know, that's like grasping. And so it's just like, just relax a little bit. Just settle back. Yeah, last question.
Yeah, I have two questions. One, when you're meditating and there's an outside noise, like there's some pretty birds and it seems to me that that's part of it, because it is in the moment. And so rather than, isn't part of awareness acknowledging that sound and just, but not overly thinking about it, but saying that in the moment there's that sound, that you can still concentrate on your breath, and there's a point, and because you don't say it's a plane, you acknowledge the noise, but you keep with the breath. It seems that the flow goes better than, and it's part of being aware.
Okay, so the first question or comment was about outside sounds coming, like the beautiful sound of the birds, for example, which we just heard. And isn't the point to include them in your awareness, not to get carried away by them, but to acknowledge them and be able to be with the breath? And I'd say yes, very much so. So there's a balance there too with, and you even might leave the breath and just focus fully on the hearing. It sort of depends on what style of meditation you're pursuing, but absolutely. You don't want to be guarded and try to block it out, because you're not going to be able to anyway.
Right. The second question was, I forgot the second.
It'll come back. It'll come back as soon as we meditate. Okay, I just want to speak a little bit, and then we're going to do some walking meditation, and then come back before we break for lunch. So the formal loving kindness meditation is one where, rather than gathering our attention around the feeling of the breath, we're gathering our attention around the silent repetition of certain phrases. That's what we call the primary object. That's home base. And again, it's not like a tight exclusive focus where we're trying to block out everything else, but it's like a light awareness. We stay connected to the repetition of these phrases. And in sitting, there's a whole style of doing it. We also do loving kindness practice while walking, and that's how I'd like to begin. So whether in sitting or walking, the purpose of the loving kindness practice is not to try to, just get a lot of feeling going that isn't real. It's not to manufacture an emotional state, but to shift the way we pay attention and let the shift in attention guide us to whatever may come. It's like the example I used last night. If you're in the habit of thinking about yourself and at the end of the day, and you only pretty well remember what you did during the day that wasn't that great, we want to expand that sense of who we are through the offering of loving kindness to ourselves. It doesn't mean we were perfect and that we didn't make any mistakes, but it means that our tendency to maybe focus too much on or fixate on or obsess about what was not so great is only like a little sliver of reality. Let's expand it to what is actually more genuinely true by including the positive as well. So it's not phony and it's not make-believe, but it's definitely an effort. It's an intentional act that actually brings us closer to the truth. Or, something I talk about all the time now is the research that's being done on the power of gratitude, and one of the scientists in the room can affirm this or deny it, but somebody told me that research is showing that one of the most powerful healing things we can do is keep a gratitude journal, and just like at the end of the day, write down 3 things we're grateful for from that day. And I would say for me, maybe being a native New Yorker, that is not my automatic response at the end of the day. I have like a lot of conditioning, so that at the end of the day, I think about, can you believe what that guy said? Or the train was late. That was a bummer, or what went wrong, who didn't behave that well. It's just in me as a force of conditioning. For me to, at the end of the day, to think about 3 things I was grateful for that day takes effort. It's a certain kind of intentionality, but it's an intelligent effort. It's saying, you know what? I have a tendency to look at a day for all kinds of reasons through this lens. I'm going to see what it's like if I expand that. You're not making up things. There's so much that we miss, right? During the day, because we're only fixated on what's wrong or what we don't have, what other people have, all kinds of things that keep us from appreciating or feeling grateful for what we do have, or even noticing what we do have. So I say to people, why don't you try to think of 3 things you're really grateful for today? And breathing can be one of them. Right? It's usually not that big a stretch to think of 2 others. And if it is a big stretch, we make that stretch. So it's that same kind of effort. You know, it shouldn't be phony, it shouldn't be laborious or grim, but we're experimenting. Like, well, okay, you know, I'm not used to doing this. Let me try it. Let me see what it's like when I wish myself well, when I pay attention to others instead of ignore them or rigidly categorize them as not counting or bad, totally, or whatever it might be. Let me try to experiment and just stretch and see what it's like. So we do that stretch through the silent repetition of certain phrases. That's the means or the mechanism for the experiment. And you know, certainly throughout today, and then again tomorrow in a different context, you know, we'll talk about the nature of that stretch, and things that are involved and are also challenging to that. So in walking meditation, it's usually slightly different than sitting in doing loving kindness, and there are many styles and possibilities as ways of doing it. I'm going to offer you my favorite and suggest we do it for about half an hour, during which we'll be silent and just get outside. I hear there's shade. I'm the only person probably who cares about shade, being a New Yorker, but you all know how to find it anyway, somewhere over there. And the way that loving kindness is done walking, or the way I like to do it walking, is you just walk at a normal pace, eyes open, and this is a silent repetition of certain phrases. So you're just walking along, and as you're walking, completely aware of, you know, maybe the feeling of the breeze or the sun or whatever, you have a light awareness resting on certain phrases, directing loving kindness for yourself. So maybe it's just like, may I be happy, may I be peaceful. May I be happy, may I be peaceful. Okay? So it needs to be a light awareness, so you're not like hunkering down, trying to block out everything else. So you're walking along with those phrases, and then you hear a bird, or you see a sweet dog, or you see another person coming by. And just for a moment include them, like, oh, be happy. And then go on, doing the loving kindness for yourself. So the baseline is the offering of phrases to ourselves, whatever words you want to use, simple, you know, so you can say them over and over again. And then we just extend as being, or maybe you have a strong memory of somebody, you get a strong hit of somebody, just for a few moments, oh, be happy. And then go back to the phrases for yourself. Is that clear? Is that instruction clear? Okay, so we're going to take half an hour. Please use it as a time for practice. If you don't want to walk, you can sit outside, just be happy. And Tucker will ring a bell, no doubt, to bring us back in and begin again.